And we are rolling. Okay, so I'm here with Russell, and we're about to go to the third section, maybe the third series of questions. Now, you talked about this, you mentioned this earlier in our first part of our discussion. You brought up some obstacles you encountered. So, the first question I actually have for this series of questions is, as a teacher, what were some obstacles that you encountered in China? And maybe we've gone over that a little bit, but maybe you can get into that a bit more or bring up some other examples. So, what were some obstacles, and how did you overcome them?
Okay, sure. Yeah, obviously we have mentioned a little bit, or at least I mentioned a couple of things being language barrier. I mentioned that briefly, being kind of like the way that students find it difficult to speak their minds or speak out, afraid of, making mistakes. Um, I would say, but I would say that, of course, the culture itself is a bit of a barrier. But the biggest thing that I found to be one of the biggest issues, and I think this could be the reason why a lot of foreigners leave early after 6 months or a year, don't tend to
Yeah.
stay more than a year at a time, is probably because of the disorganization. I think you can
Oh,
attest to
yeah.
this. Um,
Yes.
yeah, I think when it comes to organizing anything, putting anything to a date, putting anything to on a time frame, on a reasonable schedule, it just doesn't happen. Even simple
No.
things that you think would be structured very well, for example, the way that a term time is structured. What I mean by that is when the class finishes or starts at the beginning of a semester or at the end of a semester, quite often the dates don't change. It will be the same every year. Okay, it's around this date in September we finish. Sorry, this time in September we start. It's around this time in January or February we'll finish and start again. Um, it's not like that in China, and I think the reason is because a lot of it is the states decides when these things happen, and they have
Yeah.
so much control that schools can't even determine when they will finish for summer or start up for winter vacation time or whatever. They can't even decide that individually. It's very much done by the state. They
Yeah.
decide the time. They decide when you, even things like, okay, this festival is coming up. Let's take, for example, the Dragon Boat Festival. It
Right.
starts on this year, maybe it's going to start on a Tuesday. Um, so you won't be working Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but you'll have to work Friday. You don't even know if you have to make up those classes or not until the government decides. And then the school
Yeah.
can make a decision.
Yeah.
Do the teachers need to come in? Do the students need to make up an extra class for ones that they've missed or not? That is very much decided the day before. So yeah, forget being able to travel or buy a train ticket and travel, because it's not going to happen, because you can't plan around something you don't know. You
Yeah.
always the problem I find is that you always feel like you're on call
Yeah.
24/7, and if you don't answer your phone or a message within 10 minutes of them sending it, they get irate. A lot of the schools will get irate with you and say, "Well, where were you? Why aren't you replying? We need you right now." And things become very important, or things become very serious because everything's left last minute. So,
Yes.
for example, in the West, maybe something's happened and you miss a phone call, but it's no big deal because then you get an email or you call them back the next day and things are still trying to be figured out. But in China, everything's left last minute. So that if you miss a phone
Yeah.
call, it's very much like you missed that phone call. Now you need to come in and redo 3 lessons or something because you never answered your phone, because everything's done at such a last minute kind of time frame. It makes everything difficult, from planning your lessons, scheduling, to taking time off, to booking flights home. Even you can't even book a
Yeah.
flight because
Yeah.
you don't know when your classes are going to finish. So I think this organization, and it's something that I didn't expect, because when I think of places like Japan, I think of people being very kind of structured, almost a bit like Germany, living up to the stereotype that they're
Yeah.
structured to the time
Right.
frame. Just as when I think about people in Brazil and I have Brazilian friends, they're very much the opposite. Oh, whenever you can,
Yeah.
whenever
Yeah.
you would like. Oh, I'm going to be here late or whatever. Or they say 5 o'clock, they're here at 6. Um,
Yeah. It's like just
and
like the
that's
Philippines. They have Filipino time.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, exactly like the Philippines. Um, yeah, just I just didn't expect it. Okay, maybe day-to-day things, but when it comes to organizations and businesses and schools, it's not what you expect. And I think a lot of it is down to the fact that the government is very much controlling of the time and dates. And I think people kind of get a kick out of this when I tell them that the government decides when they put the heating on in schools,
Oh yeah,
or when you want to put the heating on in your apartment. It's not the school that decides; it's the government. They flip a switch and
right.
they decide when to heat your apartment or not.
Yeah, very, very centralized and bureaucratic.
Oh yeah, the red tape and the red tape and the bureaucracy is just crazy. Trying to get a visa or change schools or yeah, apply for kind of an extend on your visa or something like this. And quite often the schools are not that helpful. They will leave you to
Right.
do it. You end up doing their work for them.
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. Again, that can vary on your school and your helpers, and I think we've both had good and bad experiences in that. I've had some schools where, the staff were very helpful and they always had someone available, and they would help me do things, and they would send a student. And then I've worked for schools that were just like, oh, well, figure it out. You're on your own. Um,
Yeah, yeah. There's
yeah,
a level of independence that they expect. And if you've been in China a year or something, they pretty much have made up their mind that you are an independent person and you're expected to do everything yourself. And if you were in any other country, I would say that it's doable. You can manage by yourself. But
yeah,
China
yeah,
is kind of a rare case in the fact that a lot
yeah,
of people don't speak English, and you can see how a lot of
right,
these things become difficult, from going to the supermarket and buying something to getting a taxi to
right.
watching a movie or buying a movie ticket, anything like that,
And that's
or
also
changing your
it's
phone
part of,
number or something.
yeah. And some of those things are very frustrating, but for me, I think that was always part of, especially my earlier years, in my 20s, that was sort of part of the adventure, the
Mm,
excitement was
yeah,
was just yeah, sometimes just plunging in and trying to figure things out, especially like, yeah, trying to communicate with a taxi driver, or trying to maneuver around, navigate through a city. Like I can, some of those things can be really, really fun, especially, you get a phrase book and you learn some things,
mm,
but yeah, other situations it can be a headache. So yeah, there can be a lot of obstacles one can encounter, and you just have to be ready for it, and try to have a good attitude about it, and try to see the humor in some of the
yeah,
situations, because sometimes, in my case, it's happened in China that a situation gets frustrating to a point where it just falls off a cliff and it just becomes funny. Like it's no longer frustrating. It's just like kind of amusing, just the ridiculousness of things.
sometimes, yeah, yeah, for sure.
You
And
know
I
what I mean?
think, I think it's a good way, it's a good test to weed out people that are not going to hack it. And again, that's kind of the reason why people last 6 months or a year. They can't even finish their contract. I think it's a good kind of exercise into saying, are you adaptable enough to deal with this? Are you independent enough? Are you willing to take on this challenge and overcome it? And you do feel good about yourself when you do learn a bit of Chinese, have a
Oh yeah,
conversation, be able
yeah,
to go to the bank and open a bank account by yourself without using a translator or something. Um, it does kind of make you feel pretty, that you've achieved something substantial.
yeah,
And me being in China for 5 years, yeah, I feel like even though all of these things kind of stack up and it's easy to say, oh, there's so many negatives to China, it it still brings me back. I'm still looking at going back. I'm still going to go there and deal
yeah.
with all of this stuff day to day life, because I overall do enjoy China. And I think it's easy to nitpick and say all the negatives, but there are a lot of positives to living in China. And I think I mentioned it very early on that, yeah, okay, there's a few teaching hours. Quite often, there's a lot of time away, holiday, vacation time that you're willing to take, and they are very free with the curriculum, as long as you're, not overstepping your boundaries, talking about things you shouldn't talk about. You're pretty much free to teach the way that you want to teach, the way that the subjects that you want to teach, the topics you want to teach to a
Hold that thought.
to
Hold that thought.
go.
I like what you're saying, but that's going to come up in a later question.
Okay.
You're on the right track.
Jumping
You're
ahead.
just jumping ahead a bit, but that's all good stuff. That's all really good. So yeah, so okay, there's a lot of obstacles. We've covered some of that. I think I'm going to skip one of these questions here because I think we already covered it. Let's see. I want to ask you now about advice. So let's say you're speaking to somebody who's thinking about going to China to teach for at least a year, give it a shot. They've never been to China. Maybe they've never traveled at all. I don't know. This could be so many different people. It could be someone right out of college. Could be an experienced teacher. But someone comes to you. They said, okay, hey, I'm thinking about going to China to teach for a year. I heard that you were there for 5 years. What's some advice that you could give me? What should I know? How can I prepare? What would you tell them?
Okay, I think you summarized it quite well when you said that find it as a challenge, a way to challenge yourself, because it will be a challenge. You will have things that you have to overcome, whether it's the language, whether it's the way that the school is kind of organized or disorganized, um, the way that you are kind of set out to teach in the classroom. um, I think that you have to kind of take that in your stride a little bit and understand that things aren't going to go the way that you expect them to. China isn't
Nope.
going to be what you expect them to be. It's very
Nope.
difficult to plan for the future. Be aware of all of those things. But also, if I had to give kind of advice, I would say make the most of your time there
Oh
in
yeah.
China. Learn some of the language, travel a little bit, talk to as many people as you can, try all the different foods there are, and see as much as you can while you're there, because yeah,
Yeah.
the time
Yeah.
will go quick, and before you know it, you're leaving China, and you wish you had seen more than just the Great Wall
Right.
or something like that.
And some people, especially I think like you and I, really take advantage and do travel around and see stuff. And a lot of people do, but I've met a lot of people, yeah, who don't. They're there for 1 or more years and they rarely leave their city. They don't see any, there's one guy I know I worked with in Beijing for a year. He always talked about going to the Great Wall and he never did. And then he went back to the States, and don't be that guy.
Yeah, yeah, don't do that.
So that's definitely, yeah, good advice that I totally agree with. And now what about, this is a little bit simpler. Would you say there's any like things that people should bring with them that maybe they can't find in China? Are there maybe certain like phone apps they should install, or any books they should bring that you might recommend? Like I would recommend to people, for instance, bring a Kindle. You're gonna have a lot of free time. You're probably going to read something. Sometimes it can be hard to find English books in China, and having a Kindle is super convenient and I think worth bringing. Now, what about you? What are some things you would say that, again, it could be like maybe there's some books you recommend or some apps, but what do you think?
I would say be aware that a lot of the things that you are used to accessing are not accessible in China without a VPN.
VPN
So, yeah, VPN. So, a virtual protection network. Oh, I don't even know what VPN
or
stands for now.
private network?
Private network. Yeah,
Like,
that's it.
yeah,
Virtual private network. I think that's it. Basically, it's a way to kind of reroute your IP address so that the connection thinks that you're in another country.
you
So
can
you're able to
scale the
access.
Great Firewall of China.
Yeah, jump the wall for sure. Um, because you're not going to be able to access the things if you're, I don't know, maybe for me it was a little bit different. We're talking 5 or 6 years ago. Okay, I think it's very difficult to live in this day and age if you're a Westerner. If you're a Westerner without things like Google, YouTube, Facebook, and maybe Instagram, those things will not be accessible with a normal phone without a
Right,
VPN, or a laptop without a
right.
VPN. You won't access them. So I would say before looking at any of those things, I'd say maybe a VPN. If you're not willing to go the VPN route, because it can be expensive, it can be a bit tiresome, a bit troublesome, a
Yeah,
bit difficult to set up. If you don't, if you're happy to forego Google, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, you want to get the China experience, which is fine. You know, for my first couple of years, I didn't use a VPN. I would say things that you could download right now in terms of apps. Pleco, that's Pleco. I'm sure other people have mentioned this one. A Chinese to English dictionary, which is amazing. Not only does
Yes.
it have standard ways and pronunciation, helpful pronunciation and audio, it also has things like sorry, my mind's gone blank. Street vernacular, what do you
Yeah.
call it? Slang. Sorry, I don't know why I'm drawing a blank there.
Slang.
Yeah,
Street
slang.
vernacular. That's a very English way of putting it.
There you go. Yeah, street language or whatever. I don't know, but yeah, the vernacular, slang, and that's something that you come across quite often. You have people speak Chinese, especially the younger generation. They're going to be using words that maybe you wouldn't necessarily find. If you're interested in Chinese, yeah, exactly right, and you wouldn't know what that meant if someone said like little 666. You might not understand what that means,
Yeah.
but with dictionary, it can kind of cut through a lot of that. If you're interested in learning Chinese, and I would strongly advise learning at least the basics, maybe a few hundred characters would be enough to kind of get you going. Yeah, I would say the HSK exam. I'm not sure if anyone mentioned this before. I'm a big, strong supporter of the HSK exam. I think they're wonderful, laid out, very clear, very structured exam and ways of learning the language. So if you're interested in Chinese, check out HSK. That's in Chinese, they call it the Hanyu Shui Ping
Kaoshi, yeah.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, the HSK. It just means the Chinese language proficiency test. Check that out because it's very, very useful.
And there's a lot of like pretty good. In addition to that, there's a lot of good phrase books and language books and books with characters and grammar, and I've owned several over the years. And I would say again, go to a bookstore and find whatever works for you, whatever is available. Maybe pick up a couple because that can be super helpful. And there were definitely times in China where I was just alone and I had all this free time, and I would just go through these books and learn some vocabulary, learn some basic phrases, just like ask, how much does something cost, count to 100, things like that. Super useful. I totally agree with that. Now, one more, any books about China, not related to the language, maybe, like just the history or the culture or someone's memoirs or any books you've read that you might recommend? Like, one book that we both read that I really enjoyed was The Private Life of Chairman Mao, which was written by his personal physician. I think that's a really interesting read about a very specific and relevant and recent part of their history. But are there any books you would recommend?
Yeah, I think you kind of beat me to it with that one, with The Private Life of Chairman Mao, because it is a wonderful book. Not only are we talking about kind of more contemporary history, 1940s, 1950s, up until the 1970s, 1980s. Very a must read, in my opinion. And I think you mentioned that. A great read, a great history book. But I think it's important to note that book is banned in China. So, you're not going to be able to find it when you're there.
Put it on your Kindle.
Put it on your Kindle, as you said. And I made the mistake of having an iPad with iBooks. You can't access those books on iTunes without a VPN. So Kindle may be the way, or download a PDF if you can find it. Or Kindle would kind of circumnavigate a lot of those issues. Get a Kindle. In terms of other books, I think you mentioned one before, and I did buy the book. I just haven't read it, and that was I can't remember the name. Swan. What was it called?
Wild Swans.
Wild Swan. Yeah, sorry, that was it. Wild Swans. I did buy the book. Okay, I did buy the book. I just haven't got around to reading it yet. One book that I did really like, that's a bit more contemporary and not related to China itself, but related to the mentality of the Chinese kind of way of thinking and educating, was a book called Tiger Mom. Tiger Mum. Yeah, it's
Oh,
American book, and it's by
heard
I
of that.
believe it's by Amy Chu. Um, and it's a wonderful book. It's a very short book. It's not too long. It's a very easy read. It's basically a mum. I think she's a Chinese American raised in America, and she raised her children in a very Chinese way. And it kind of shows the success she had, but also the problems that came along with that, with teaching your children in a certain way. You might
Yeah.
already know that stereotypically Asians, especially Chinese, are very diligent in their studies. And I've
Yes.
kind of heard some horror stories talking to some of these students in China, the way that they've been treated, the parents have treated them, pushing them towards education. On one hand, I kind of sympathize because I understand that it's a very um, competitive market in China right now to find jobs, to
Yeah.
be ahead of the curve. There's such a huge population there. Everybody
Yeah.
that has a degree, is fighting for these small amount of jobs. It is very, very, very difficult to find jobs in China right now, and the pay is quite often subpar. It's not enough really to pay more than
Yeah.
your rent and meals, your
Yeah.
living day to day. And you find that education is a big push for parents to achieve more. And quite often, education is the way for Chinese to overcome and achieve better jobs, be educated
Yeah.
abroad, for example. Quite often, you'll see students being sent abroad. This book tackles a lot of those subjects, a lot of those topics in a Western mind frame, but
Yeah.
in English, talking about the Chinese way of bringing up your children. Is it successful? Is it worth it? And it kind of discusses a lot of the things, even Confucianism in a way, touches on a lot of these topics. And yeah, I would definitely recommend that book, and that's called Tiger Mom.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I've heard of that, and I think it was pretty popular a few years ago, or whenever it came out.
Yeah, I
But
think it was on the New York Times bestseller list. Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure.
something like that. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it got a lot of attention. And one other book I'll throw out there. I actually think you're the one who sort of mentioned it to me somehow, or it came up. I forget the context, but there was this book published, I think, in the 1930s by an American who'd been in China for a year, and it's called Ways That Are Dark,
Mm.
and it's actually kind of controversial, but I think I read the whole thing, maybe not the last couple pages, but that's one of the things I've been reading this year, and I found it fascinating and not politically correct at all. It doesn't hold any punches, but a lot of what he wrote about, a lot of his observations, I found to be pretty accurate. And I think I sent you a few passages, a few months ago, saying, "Oh,
Mm.
dude, this sound familiar?" And this is again from a book that almost 100 years ago, and I find that so fascinating that in some ways, in spite of opening up to the West and advancements in technology and all this, that in some ways they're still the same now as they were,
Yeah, and the
you know.
mindset. Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And what's funny is that I did read a lot of excerpts from that book, Ways That Are Dark. I think it's by Townsend, someone Townsend.
Ralph Townsend, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it was written by a British author, but I couldn't find a copy.
I think he was
Couldn't find a physical
American. I
book.
think he's American.
I was in, oh,
Maybe I'm
maybe I'll
wrong.
have to check it out.
Yeah, me
Yeah,
too.
another book that I did start reading, unfortunately, I didn't get to finish, but I did enjoy what I was reading was Twilight in the Forbidden City. And
Oh.
that was kind of based on some around the same time foreigners coming over to China writing about their experiences. I think some of it was kind of loosely based on the film The Last Emperor, which I think you might have seen.
Oh, I never finished it, but yeah, I'm familiar with that. Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a great film. Again, kind of more contemporary, 1940s kind of onwards, and kind of shows how China
Is it
developed.
is it the 1940s? The Last Emperor? Oh, it was set in the night. Was it set in the
Yeah,
wait,
yeah.
wait, wait.
It was
Okay,
filmed
because
in the 80s, I think.
yeah, I think the late 80s. I actually remember, like as a kid in the 80s, going to the theater or the cinema and yeah, seeing a poster for it. Yeah, I tried watching it several years ago, but I got distracted and didn't
Uh, It's a
finish it.
long film. It's like 3 hours or something.
Maybe that's it.
I'd
And
say go back. I think having experience in China, I think you're going to appreciate the film a lot more now than you did before. And I tell you what,
yeah,
something I do enjoy watching more recently, talking about films, are the Bruce Lee films, like the old karate kind
okay,
of kung fu movies, kind of developed
yeah,
obviously in Hong Kong during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, that kind of era.
yeah,
And what's interesting is that these movies were coming out around that time. And then kind of after Bruce Lee kind of took the reins, I guess it was more like Jackie Chan era, 90s, 2000s.
yeah,
But what's
yeah,
interesting is that these movies were being filmed and coming out of Hong Kong at that time when China, mainland China, was in complete disarray. You
yeah.
know, it
East
kind
and
of,
West Berlin.
yeah, it's crazy to see the two, and then this kind of supports what we were saying earlier about, okay, it's China in Hong Kong and China is nothing but name, really, and nothing but name. Could I really
Yeah, yeah.
compare Hong Kong
Not in
to
spirit, not in
China?
spirit.
No, not at all.
And
Not
this
at
is and this is one thing. Now we're going off track, but that's all right. But this is one thing I sometimes have brought up with some classmates in America when they talk about like race, for example. And I often say, you know, to me, the older I get, because I'm getting kind of old, and I think that's a good thing. The older I get, the more I read, the more I meet people, the more I travel, because I think those things help me grow, and I don't want to stagnate. I want to grow. But I feel like race is very, I don't know, inconsequential compared to something like culture and ideology.
Mm.
It's because again, like yeah, when you look at mainland China or Hong Kong, yeah, on the surface there's some similarities and they're the same race, but they are different people. And I've been to South Korea, I haven't been to North Korea, but I imagine again the divide that like again I feel like if you or I went to Japan, in some ways, the Japanese people would feel they had more in common with us than people in China. Or if you or I went to Hong Kong, they might identify with you or I more than people in mainland China because of certain values and
Oh yeah, for
ideology.
sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
I mean, you need
so
to. I mean, right now they're
yeah,
flying American flags in Hong Kong right now, so that kind of just shows
and the
where they're. Yeah.
yeah. And yeah, you're right. Sorry to cut you off again. I think there's a little time delay, but yeah, they've been flying flags in Hong Kong, and I've been reading, and I like this that I think the UK said they're willing to import Hong Kong
Mm.
citizens now,
Yeah.
and I don't
Yeah.
know if it's only the UK, and I think that would work. I think that Hong Kong citizens would integrate pretty well into British society because they were under British rule for 100 years, and I think that's part of the reason why they're developed and and have certain again habits that are familiar to me. So yeah, it's really interesting. But anyway,
Yeah.
one other book I just want to mention, and this may or may not make it into the final cut. But one other book I want to read, I haven't gotten around to it. I got all these other books to read and things to do. And one of my friends, another guy I interviewed, mentioned it to me. But I think it's called Riding the Iron Rooster, and it's by, I'm sure you're familiar with, Paul Theroux, the travel author.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. I've heard of
Yeah.
this book.
And his son is Louis Theroux, so he's more contemporary. You know Louis Theroux, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. He's wonderful. I love his documentaries.
Yeah, he's fun. So yeah, his dad, wrote all these great travel books over the years. But I think in the 1980s, he traveled extensively around China by train, and you and I have both done that. And then yeah, wrote about his experiences. And oh, I really want to read that one. I haven't gotten around to it.
Yeah, traveling in China by train is an interesting experience, and I think and that was something I would also recommend to anybody: travel by train, plane, car, taxi, bus, as often as you can. But trains
Yeah,
are really interesting because one thing I love about China is the ability to take a train pretty much
yeah,
anywhere in
yeah,
China. Yeah, you can, and on different levels of kind of comfort. You can take the night train and have a seat. If you really wanted to go all cheap, you could have a cheap bed. You could have an expensive kind of like higher tier bed where there's only 4 beds in a room with a door. You could have ones that are more like bunk beds and completely open. They're a bit cheaper. Or you can kind of take the bullet train, which is much quicker. And they're developing a lot of these trains still now. One of the biggest, I think, amazes in technology that I saw was the maglev system in Shanghai, where they have like a magnetic levitation train. It's like a monorail, and it's like, but it's like a bullet train. It take you from I think it's something ridiculous, from like the airport to the city center in like 30 seconds or something. It's crazy quick.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really, really crazy. There was something else I wanted to mention, but I can't remember what it was now. If it comes back to me, I'll let you know.
Sure. Yeah. They do pretty good with public transportation, and that is one of the things I like about China is that, yeah, one, it's so big. There's a lot to see, and that's awesome. And then secondly, yeah, it's pretty easy to get around. Sometimes of the year it can be really hard, but yeah, if you got a light schedule and you can get, permission from your school, or if you stay there during the holidays, again, that you just have to figure all that out. But yeah, opportunities do present to travel, and yeah, riding trains around China is something I've always, really enjoyed. Anyway, so the last question to wrap this up, and you were kind of getting into this earlier, and then I cut you off. I wanted to ask you to kind of summarize. We've talked about this a lot, but what, in your opinion, what are some of the pros and some of the cons of living, working, teaching in China?
Okay, yeah, this list could go on a while, so I'm going to try and keep it a bit more brief.
Sure.
Living and working in China. I would say when it comes to working, the cons were probably a lot of the schools, whether you're teaching at a kindergarten, a high school, a primary school, a university, a language school, or something like that. Quite often you will find that they are disorganized. It's very difficult to plan more than a few days in advance often, which is a shame because it makes it difficult to travel and do all these things. But I think that's a con, quite a big con, and something that a lot of people can't deal with.
Yeah.
But the pros of working in China, I would say, often outweigh a lot of the cons. And I would say,
Yes,
for the
definitely.
most part, you're getting a lot of free time. The wage is negotiable and does vary between provinces and cities. You're in a higher province, or a bigger tier one city that's Beijing, Shanghai, or something like that. Yeah, okay, you're going to be paid a lot more, but you're going to be paying more for rent, day-to-day living expenses, riding the subway, riding the bus. Just everyday expenses become a lot more expensive. You want to buy a movie ticket, for example, it's a lot more expensive in these areas.
But that also brings up another pro, in that not all, but many schools will provide the housing or a stipend. So often you don't even have to worry about rent. Not always, but it's usually pretty easy to find a school that will provide the housing, and that's definitely a pro, especially where you and I come from, because we come from expensive places.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you're willing to live in Beijing or Shanghai or one of these bigger cities, quite often they'll give you a apartment on campus if you're working at a university or a high school, or they'll help you find an apartment off campus, give you a stipend, which sometimes is enough to pay for it. Sometimes it'll pay for the whole thing. Sometimes they'll make you share apartments. It does kind of vary between the school and the area, but for the most part, you're not going to be paying much, if anything, for living expenses. What I mean is rent, electricity, utilities. Utilities are in general quite cheap in China.
Sure.
When it comes to living in general, I found that the food can take a long time to adjust to. You might find it difficult adjusting to Chinese food because it's not like Chinese food in the West. It's not like Chinese food in the US or the UK. It's not like Panda Express. It's not like a local Chinese restaurant. It is completely
Totally
different. Yeah, and if you like
that was
spicy
another
food, yeah.
surprise. That was another surprise I had when I went there. I was surprised by how different real Chinese food was than the supposed quote unquote Chinese food I ate in America.
Yeah, it's like night and day. It's two completely different things. And yeah, you're going to struggle. You sit down in a restaurant, not only are you not going to know what you want to order, you're not going to be able to read the menu. Quite often it's in Chinese. So yeah, the pictures don't always uh, an accurate depiction of the food that you're ordering as well. So just be careful and be aware of that. Take a translator, or
Yeah.
a lot of these apps that you can use will take a picture of a menu and translate it best it can to English. Not always accurate, but that could be one way around that.
So lazy, but I guess if you're a newbie, that's all right.
Oh yeah, use the technology. That's what it's there for. Yeah, traveling in China is something that I really enjoy, and
Yeah.
being able to travel and work in China, make the most of it, travel as much as you can, and be able to use all the time and effort that you can to take a train somewhere, get off the beaten track. Don't just go see the Great Wall, go see that, but also go see some of the water towns, go see some of the poorer areas, go see some of the villages, go see some of the
Yeah.
seaside resorts and areas, go to some of the islands, go to the north, go to the south, experience all. And something I love about China is just the sheer volume.
Yeah.
There is nature. There are deserts. There are woods, and there are oceans. There's
Yeah.
everything that you could possibly want. If you're interested in snow, go up to the north and see the ice festival in the winter. You're interested in
Harbin, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're interested in like chilling by the beach in a nice hot area. Go to Sanya in the South Hainan Island. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're interested in big metropolises, go to Shenzhen, go to Beijing. You're interested in these smaller tier two, tier three cities, go visit Chengdu, go visit Xi'an, go see the Terracotta Army, go skiing. I don't know, whatever you want to do. That's one thing I
Yeah.
love about China is just so much to see. It will appeal to everybody. Everybody. There
True.
is something for everybody, and that's one thing I love.
And that's why you got to go out and experience it. Because again, some people they'll just stay in their little domain and then they don't go to Xi'an and they don't go to Chengdu or whatever. And I feel like you're missing out if you don't go see some of these places. Because yeah, there is quite a bit.
Yeah, and I'd like to say just quickly that
Yeah.
it often you see a lot of foreigners escape China. We call it the China bubble, and we
Yeah.
say escape China during the summer and winter vacation. Go to the
Sure.
Philippines, go to India, go to Nepal, go to somewhere, go back to the West. Go back to Europe or the US.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but if you can stomach it, stay in. You don't need to recharge your batteries all the time. Go see and travel in China and make the best of the time there, because once your work visa expires and you're not going to be back, you're not going to be able to go back to mainland without jumping through all these hoops. That's one good
Yeah.
thing about
Take
Hong Kong is
advantage.
that you
Yeah.
don't need a visa to visit Hong Kong. You don't need a visa to visit Taiwan. You don't need a visa to visit Macau. You can pretty much turn up. They accept um, most
Most passports.
passports. Yeah, you don't need a visa in advance. So yeah, forego seeing those places and see as much as mainland as you can.
Yeah, I say if you're just going to go to China for a year, yeah, maybe just focus on China. The holidays can be crowded. Now, again, in my case, I think it was only after like 2 or 3 years in China that I actually started dipping my toes into like Thailand and Laos and then in recent years, I spent a lot of time in the Philippines, but it is also cool to and for me that's almost another pro is not only do you have China, but you do, especially if you're in South China, you do have access to all these other really interesting countries. So if you do get to a point where you feel like you've seen enough or a holiday rolls up, or sometimes you get just like a random week off, and if that happens and you've got some money saved, I would say um, if you don't want to see something in China because sometimes it's crowded, you do have those options of, oh yeah, I'll go to Nepal and see Mount Everest, or I'll hop down to Cambodia and see Angkor Wat, and it's so cool. There are a lot of options, but yeah, definitely if you're going to be in China, see a lot and enjoy it, because there is so much. There is so much in terms of just exploring the language and the history and the country itself. And like you, I've spent quite a few years there, and I feel I've seen a lot and I've learned a lot. And I feel like it's still just kind of the tip of the iceberg. I feel like there's still
Yeah.
so much that I still would not consider myself an expert in so many ways. In spite of all the experience, I still feel very, just limited.
Yeah. And I think you could go and visit every province and still just see the tip of the iceberg. It's just a huge amount. And I think that's why a lot of Chinese prefer to travel within China. And you see a lot of domestic travel, especially during the winter vacation time when people are traveling abroad. And that's one thing we never really mentioned that I wanted to speak about quickly, was that
Sure.
something called the leftover children. Do you know? I don't know if you know much about that. Leftover children. Basically, it refers in these poorer areas where parents have to live in other cities to earn money, and they end up having to leave their children alone, sometimes with grandparents, sometimes with other family members, and they don't get to see their parents very often. And they maybe the only time they see their parents is once a year during the Spring Festival or the Chinese New Year.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. And I think, you have to deal with that. When I've worked in schools in China before, you do tend to get students that are, they can't go home. They have to stay in the school. They can't visit home very often, or even at university, they're traveling miles and miles away to live in these, schools in these dorms, and they can't afford, or they can't get tickets home because there's just no train tickets available.
Yeah. That's true. All right, cool. I think we covered everything I need to cover. So let me stop recording. And it looks like we went for about 2 hours, which is the same length that 3 of the other interviews went.